Hey there, welcome. I'm Jared Leader, the Industry Strategy Manager at SEPA, Smart Electric Power Alliance. At SEPA, we're into these trying times to find creative ways to engage with the industry. One of those ways through a series of interviews featuring different utilities and developers around different microgrid projects and strategies against natural disasters. This is the first interview of the Case Study Live series, which will feature the microgrid case studies from SEPA's most recent microgrid publication and Community Resilience for Natural Disasters. These will offer a closer look into the projects with the people that helped make it all happen. For more information or to learn more about SEPA or our microgrid publications, you can visit sepapower.org. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. All right, good morning. I'm joined by Scott Gibson, who works at the Snohomish County Public Utility District. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Jared.
Scott, can you first tell me a little bit about Snohomish County Public Utility District, where you are in the country, the types of customers, generation mix, so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're the public utility, electric and water utility for Snohomish County. So we're just north of Seattle, which is in King County. We are primarily a distribution company. About 80 to 85% of our power comes from BPA, Bonneville Power Administration, and all the dams along the Columbia River. So about 80 to 85% of our power comes from them. We distribute it. We generate about another 10% with our own hydro projects. And then the remaining 10% or so comes from wind and market purchases.
Got it. And yourself, tell me a little bit about yourself, how long you've been with the utility and what your role is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with the PUD about 20 years. I'm an electrical engineer, project manager, program manager. I have been incredibly lucky in my career. I've gotten to work on some really cool projects, got to help build 2 hydro projects, work on another one, almost got to build a tidal project. We were just about ready to finish it, but it just became too expensive, and so we shut it down. But all of those projects really prepared me for the project that we're going to talk about today.
And that's where I was just going. So most recently, you were the project manager for the Arlington Microgrid project. Can you just walk us through the story of how that project came to be, how you got involved personally, and when was it? When was that moment when Snohomish decided to pursue a microgrid project?
Yeah, this has been a 5-year journey. This started kind of at the end of 2015, first part of 2016. So our general manager, we already have 2 energy storage projects. We have a lithium-ion battery and we have a flow battery. They're both located in substations doing grid support. But then our general manager, Craig Collar, said, "Hey, Scott, let's do another energy storage project, but let's have this one demonstrate all the different things that a battery could do. Let's demonstrate the multiple uses of energy storage. Let's show how a battery can be used as an emergency power supply in lieu of a fossil fuel generator. And let's also show how it can be used for grid support and ancillary services, and also show how it can be used for improved renewable energy integration." And so the idea was to try to figure out the multiple uses so that we could come up with the maximum value, the maximum return on these assets. But we needed to walk through this to understand that, learn about it.
Scott, you mentioned the importance of demonstrating different types of technologies. I understand that the project incorporates solar PV and battery storage, but also some innovative vehicle to grid infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's that about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a pretty cool part of the project. It's actually really a pilot project within our pilot project. So we, when we were brainstorming about all the components, one of the people said, "Hey, let's experiment with electric vehicles too, and V2G, because after all, electric vehicles are just another form of energy storage." So we said, okay, let's have a couple of electric vehicles sitting out there. Let's have a couple of electric vehicle chargers, V2G, they're bidirectional chargers, so that you can charge the vehicles and discharge them. And so the thought is that in the middle of the night, if we're powering up the building with our battery and the big battery is starting to go dead and we have a couple of vehicles sitting there, we're really focused on fleet vehicles. First of all, let me just make that point, not on private vehicles. We're focused on fleet vehicles. So if we have a couple of fleet vehicles sitting there, they're not being used, we can pull the electricity from these fleet vehicles and use that to keep the lights on. So we want to understand how we can use our vehicles, use our fleet vehicles to help keep the lights on in the event of a disaster. So that's the reason for V2G. And then our customers potentially will start adding more fleet vehicles. Amazon put in an order of 100,000 vans from Rivian, and we know that our community transit businesses are going to be adding electric buses. There's the potential for doing electric vehicle rentals. So if these companies have 10%, 20% of their fleet just sitting there doing nothing, and we get this V2G stuff figured out, well, then maybe we could incentivize them to connect those vehicles to the grid, and then for the right price, let us discharge those vehicles into the grid to reduce our morning peaks, our evening peaks, and help with grid support, help with ancillary services. So that's the idea. This is very new stuff. Very few people are doing this. So this is really a fun project, and I look forward to seeing how it works in the future.
Me too, and I'm very excited about how microgrids can facilitate fleet electrification and reduce upfront costs that otherwise would be necessary for infrastructure and reducing those peaks. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm personally excited. That's great that you are all demonstrating that and exploring that within this project as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's a fun piece. And we've partnered with Mitsubishi on this. So Mitsubishi is doing a number of these projects over in Japan. So Europe, Asia is working on this stuff, and they're starting to get it figured out. But there's very little work going on in the U.S. at the moment. So this is going to be a fun one to experiment with.
And where did the actual site location? So it sounds like you had all the pieces in place. You wanted to test energy storage for replacing fossil fuels, also to promote grid services. Can you talk a little bit about, what considerations were in place in terms of siting and the location that you ended up picking?
Yeah, that was a fun conversation. So when this project first started, we had a team of people brainstorming the ideas, what to do, what the components should be, and the site. And one of the people, Jason Ziskowski, said, hey, we already have 2 located in substations. So let's put one near a building. And we just bought 25 acres for a kind of a North County, north office site. And we were going to be building a couple of buildings there and a backup data center. So we figured, hey, this would be the perfect site to put a microgrid. We could power up these buildings to be able to keep crews powered, or keep crews in lights in the event of a disaster or an outage. And there was plenty of room for the battery and plenty of room for solar. So that's how we, this was a greenfield site, and we could tailor it to exactly what we wanted.
So Snohomish sits right into in the what is called the big 3 in terms of earthquake faults. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I understand that this is something that's impactful to you and your customers. What were the considerations around the earthquake for this site or this location?
Yeah, so eventually, it's been quite a while since we've had an earthquake, few hundred years, and we're due for another one. So the Cascadia Rising Fault, the South Whidbey Island Fault, they're pretty close to us, and if something lets off, then we could be out of power for a long time. So as I said, most of our power comes from BPA. We have high voltage transmission lines coming across the mountains. If there's a big earthquake and there's a big landslide and these power lines are taken out, we're going to need to be self-sufficient for a month or 2 months or 3 months while everything is rebuilt. And so this microgrid would keep the office powered up. It would keep the data center powered up, keep our crews and office people working while everything's put back together.
So in terms of a fossil fuel disruption, or just in terms of a utility disruption, this will be a key component to keep the lights on through an event.
Yeah. So just to add, so traditionally everybody has fossil fueled, either diesel or propane powered generators. But if there's a big earthquake and those transmission lines are down, well, then roads and bridges are down too. So we're not going to get fuel brought in for those generators. So we will have a generator just in case, but the idea is to rely on the battery and the solar as much as possible and preserve that fuel for just when we need it.
And I know your county is split between the north and the south, Interstate 5 bridge, which is a big infrastructure for that fossil fuel transportation.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
So I think you already mentioned some of the other utility folks that you worked with, the impetus of coming together and the planning that had to happen from the utility side. It's clear how much work you guys have put into this effort. Can you talk a little bit about other stakeholders external to the utility that were involved to the project's success?
Yeah. So a project like this requires a lot of people. First, there's a big group of people within the PUD that help with planning and design. But really, the project first started off with the Washington Department of Commerce and their grant. So I think that the Clean Energy Fund 2 grant process started in early 2016. So we applied for a grant, and it was a competitive process. We were one of 5 different utilities that were awarded a grant, and that really kicked off the project. And the Department of Commerce was really our first stakeholder. In probably mid 2017, we were awarded a grant, $3.5 million. So there was a total of 12. We got 3.5 of that. And that really kicked off the project, and we kind of hit the ground running. So right after that, we hired the University of Washington, because part of the grant process requires that we write reports, technical and economic reports, that we can then share with other utilities, universities, vendors, so they can learn from this project too. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Just really quick, the stakeholders, just to add on to that. So we hired the University of Washington. We immediately hired Burns and McDonnell. They're our engineering firm. Then right after that, we hired A&R Solar to construct the solar piece of the project. We hired Mitsubishi to help out with the V2G. And most recently, we have ABB on contract to do the battery and the microgrid control system. So yeah, a lot of different players with this project.
Were there any unlikely allies in the project that you weren't really considering or thought going into it?
Initially we didn't think we'd be talking to other utilities as much as we are now. And there's a lot of other utilities that are doing this. And so it's incredibly valuable to talk to those utilities. And one of the things that the Department of Commerce has done is they pulled together all of the people who've received grants, and quarterly we talk about our projects, we share lessons learned, and it's just a really valuable way to share knowledge and kind of learn from what others are doing, so we don't repeat others' mistakes. So I think they've become a very valuable ally.
And you just hit on this, the importance of sharing with your peers. And on that note, first off, congratulations on the project. I know there are a lot of other people and utilities out there that are embarking in projects like this and efforts like this, trying to understand how microgrids can work onto their system. If you were to give one piece of advice based on your experience with the state, with the university, with the other stakeholders when it came down to siting, working internally with your utility, any related to the project, if there's one piece of advice to give those utilities out there, what would it be?
Yeah, this is a good question. I've been thinking about this. So I think my advice is for utilities to take that first step, with the understanding that the economics probably aren't going to pencil out right away, but knowing that the value of learning is incredibly valuable. So utilities understand the energy landscape. They know that renewable energy and therefore energy storage is going to be part of their future. They want to integrate more renewables onto their system, but they want to do it in a way that doesn't impact rates. So by doing projects like this, they can understand how to do these projects, how to come up with standards, how to come up with interconnection procedures to make these projects less technically challenging and more economically viable. And then understand, right now the markets are changing. A lot of markets are really just beginning, and it's hard to make these projects pencil out in the existing markets. But with new energy imbalance markets starting up, these projects are going to become more valuable. And the more we know about them, the more that we can take advantage of those markets, and the more that we can create standards and then drive those costs down. So yeah, I think just take that first step.
Learning the value streams, as you referred to earlier, understanding all the value streams.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Scott, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to hearing from more great things from Snohomish County Public Utility District and hopefully having you back on.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. Thanks, Jared.
Well, thanks to our listeners for tuning in. For those of you out there that want to learn more, be sure to go to sepapower.org and download our latest Microgrid playbook and the full case study on the Snohomish County Public Utility District's microgrid and resilience strategy against earthquakes. This is Jared Leader signing off.